Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. Picture this. You're dying of thirst in a scorching desert, your vision blurring. Your pack animals are collapsing in the sand. Then a lone buffalo appears. But this buffalo isn't salvation because of its meat. It's salvation because of what's sloshing in its belly. Within minutes, you're drinking warm, slimy water straight from the animal's stomach, and it tastes like liquid gold. This happened to William Becknell and his desperate traders in 1822, somewhere in the desert between Kansas and New Mexico. This moment of survival would help create one of America's most legendary trade routes, the Santa Fe Trail. Today, we're diving into how a failed horse trader from Missouri accidentally opened the gateway to the American Southwest, sparked a trade boom worth millions, and helped set the stage for westward expansion. Our story begins in summer 1821 with William Becknell, a Franklin, Missouri resident drowning in debt. So he did what desperate frontiersmen did, decided to head west and see what fortune might bring. Becknell placed an ad in the Missouri Intelligencer, seeking companions to join him westward for trading horses and mules. 17 men took their chances. On September 1st, 1821, this ragtag band crossed the Missouri River toward the Arkansas River. Each man led a pack horse loaded with cheap trinkets for Indian trade: mirrors, bells, bright cloth, basic tools. But Becknell had picked the worst possible time. It was late trading season. Indians had already disposed of their stolen Spanish horses and were hunting elsewhere. For weeks, they trudged through Kansas without doing any business. By present-day La Junta, Colorado, their prospects looked grim. They'd traveled hundreds of miles without a single trade. Most sensible men would have headed home. But William Becknell wasn't most men. In a moment of either brilliance or desperation, he decided to head south into Spanish territory. Following an ancient Indian trail, Becknell's party climbed over Raton Pass and descended toward the Canadian River. They were now in enemy territory. The next morning brought one of those moments too perfect to be real. Mexican soldiers rode into view, and the Americans froze. Being caught in Spanish territory could mean imprisonment. Robert McKnight and his men had been thrown into Mexican dungeons for nearly a decade. But instead of drawing weapons, the Mexican soldiers smiled. Their leader rode forward with incredible news. Mexico had won independence from Spain. The Spanish governor was gone. American traders were now welcome in Santa Fe. The soldiers didn't just deliver this world-changing news, they begged Becknell to bring his goods to the territorial capital. After months of failure, William Becknell suddenly held the winning lottery ticket of the 19th century. On November 16, 1821, Becknell's party rode into Santa Fe and discovered riches beyond dreams. The cheap goods they'd brought for Indian trade were worth their weight in silver to Mexicans. Santa Fe's citizens had been cut off from manufactured goods for years. They were hungry for everything: cotton cloth, tools, needles, thread, buttons, trinkets. And they paid in Spanish silver dollars, real money that held value worldwide. The profit margins were extraordinary. When Fanny Marshall lent her brother $60 for his pack horse and trade goods, she received $900 as her share, 1,500% return in months. Most men decided to winter in Santa Fe, enjoying newfound wealth. But Becknell, sensing this opportunity wouldn't last forever, loaded his saddlebags with silver and raced back to Missouri. When they arrived in Franklin on January 2, 1822, Word spread like wildfire. The Santa Fe Trail was born, and William Becknell had earned his place as its father. Becknell's 1822 expedition proved even more revolutionary. This time, 21 men departed with a secret weapon that would transform Western commerce: wagons. For the first time, wheeled vehicles rolled westward from Missouri, bound for Santa Fe. It was a massive gamble. Wagons were slower, more cumbersome, but could carry far more goods. But Becknell's most legendary achievement was yet to come. As his wagon train approached the Arkansas River, he faced a crucial decision. The established route led through Raton Pass, impossible for wagons. Indians had told him of the Cimarron River flowing south, providing a more direct route saving 100 miles. So Becknell made one of the most audacious decisions in American exploration. He ordered wagons across the Arkansas into unknown desert, guided only by pocket compass and hope. What followed was one of the most harrowing survival stories in frontier history. Men carried water only in personal canteens, perhaps a day's supply for what they hoped would be a direct crossing. But the river was farther than imagined, and the desert more brutal than nightmares. Heat waves shimmered like liquid fire. In sandy areas, wagon wheels cut deeply, exhausting mules. By evening of the first day, every canteen was empty and mules were collapsing from heat and thirst. Becknell drove the caravan through the night, navigating by North Star. By noon of the second day, the situation was desperate. The caravan barely crawled forward. Animals began falling and couldn't rise. Then the men did something that sounds like horror fiction. They began bleeding fallen animals and drinking their blood to stay alive. Just when it seemed the entire party would perish, salvation appeared. A lone buffalo came lumbering from the east, and experienced frontiersmen immediately recognized what this meant. The buffalo's belly was distended with water, his legs caked with fresh mud. This animal had recently drunk his fill, living proof that water existed nearby. The buffalo was shot immediately, and men fell upon the carcass. They drank slimy water from the animal's stomach, warm, foul-tasting liquid that meant life or death. Following the buffalo's tracks backward, they discovered within miles the bend of the Cimarron River they'd been seeking. Becknell's navigation had been amazingly accurate. With water reached, the worst was over. They had blazed what would become known as the Cimarron Cutoff, a route saving 100 miles but requiring crossing some of North America's most dangerous desert. The 1822 caravan's merchandise sold at enormous profits. Word spread like contagion. By 1824, 81 men traveled in a single caravan, carrying $35,000 worth of merchandise, including a small wheeled cannon for frightening Indians. Among traders were future household names: Marmaduke, who became Missouri governor, and Augustus Stores, appointed Santa Fe consul. When this caravan returned with over $180,000 in silver and gold, representing 400% profits, influential men rushed news to Senator Thomas Hart Benton in Washington. The fabulous profits created political sensation. Senator Benton, the most rabid expansionist in Congress, saw perfect excuse to push American boundaries westward. At his request, Stores prepared an official report describing the route as open, level, and free, with not a single hill of consequence. Conveniently, Stores failed to mention deadly water shortages. Benton proposed a bill for building a road from Missouri to the Mexican border. The legislation passed and was signed by President Monroe, carrying a $30,000 appropriation. But this was more political theater than practical infrastructure, establishing the Santa Fe Trail as a matter of national policy. By the late 1820s, extraordinary profits had attracted so much attention that the trail became increasingly dangerous. Early hunters had encouraged Indians to steal Spanish horses, trading entire herds for $10 worth of trinkets. But Indians learned it was easier to waylay American trading parties directly. Beaver trappers accompanying expeditions were ruthless frontiersmen who believed the only good Indian was a dead one. Their actions turned Cheyenne, Comanches, and Kiowas into deadly enemies. Violence reached crescendo in August 1828 when a returning caravan loaded with over $50,000 in Mexican silver was systematically destroyed by Comanche war parties. The attack began when two advance scouts, Daniel Monroe and McNeese, were murdered while sleeping beside a creek. When the main caravan reached the Cimarron River to bury Monroe, a small band of Comanches appeared across the water. Panicked white men opened fire immediately, killing all but one. The survivor carried word back, and soon hundreds of shrieking Comanche warriors circled the caravan. They stampeded and drove away almost the entire herd of 1,000 horses and mules. 2 weeks later, the 2nd Division, loaded with silver and driving 150 choice animals, was ambushed at the same location. Though traders fought their way out, they were harassed continuously until every animal was stolen. Cut off from water and facing death, 25 survivors abandoned their wagons and $50,000 in silver and began a desperate 400-mile walk to Missouri. When they finally staggered into independence, they were strung out over 50 miles, some blinded by starvation and fighting wolves with sticks. The 1828 massacres marked the beginning of the end for freewheeling early days. Demands for military protection led to federal troop assignments, though infantry soldiers were largely useless against mounted warriors. More significantly, the Mexican government imposed heavy import taxes that dramatically reduced profit margins. By 1829, traders making the spring journey dropped from 80 to just 20. But among those 20 were the Bent brothers, whose names would become legendary in the American West. The Santa Fe Trail that William Becknell had accidentally discovered had become something far greater than a trade route. It became the pathway by which American commerce, culture, and ultimately political control would extend into the Southwest. It's January 1830, and Rafael Rivera has been missing for 6 days in the Nevada desert. His companions from Antonio Armijo's trading expedition are starting to panic. No water, no food, no sign of their scout who disappeared while searching for a route across 300 miles of blistering, trackless wasteland. Then, on the 7th day, Rivera stumbles back into camp with news that will change the American West forever. He's found it. A path through hell itself that will make men rich beyond their wildest dreams, if it doesn't kill them first. This is the story of the Old Spanish Trail, 1,200 miles of the most dangerous, profitable, and legendary route in the American frontier. It's a tale of desperate men, impossible odds, and the relentless pursuit of fortune across landscapes so brutal they would break lesser souls. The Seeds of Destiny. The year was 1827, and the American West was still a mystery wrapped in blood and legend. Jed Smith's second California expedition had blazed new trails through territories most men considered uninhabitable. But where Smith saw exploration, others saw opportunity. George Yount learned this lesson during the winter of 1827-28. Leading his trapping band toward the Mojave villages, Yount was riding high on dreams of beaver pelts and California gold. But when a Yuma Indian brought word of Smith's massacre, Yount's blood ran cold. They turned back, but the seed had been planted. There was a route to California if one was brave enough to take it. By fall 1829, that bravery was spreading. Ewing Young, accompanied by young Kit Carson, followed the trail from the Colorado River to San Gabriel Mission. Meanwhile, Thomas Peg Leg Smith was trapping the Virgin River before taking Smith's 1827 route to dispose of his fur packs in Los Angeles. But these were just appetizers. The main course was coming. The Great Gamble. William Wolfskill was a businessman, not a romantic. When he looked at the vast wilderness between New Mexico and California, he saw profit margins. His partner, George Yount, shared this practical vision. Their plan was elegantly simple and devastatingly dangerous. Trap their way to California, sell their pelts at San Francisco Bay, invest every penny in large California mules, and drive them back to Santa Fe where they could sell for 5 times their purchase price. By the time Wolfskill joined Yount in assembling their party of 21 men, September was dying, and winter was stalking the high country. They left Taos with horses, pack mules loaded with beaver traps, trade goods for the Indians, and supplies for a 2-month journey. At Abaquiti, destined to become the eastern gateway to the old Spanish Trail, they bought 4 fat steers for fresh meat. The Wolfskill-Yount party crossed the Colorado and Green Rivers, then pushed north toward the Uinta Mountains. Instead of following existing routes, they demonstrated intimate knowledge of the terrain that allowed them to cut through interior valleys, saving precious time and distance. But the mountains had other plans. By November, when they reached the Sevier River, winter had arrived with a vengeance. 2 to 3 feet of snow slowed their progress and turned familiar landmarks into unrecognizable white monuments. In this frozen hell, they made a navigation error that would accidentally create 75 miles of what would become the established trail. They turned left when they should have turned right, becoming lost in a landscape that seemed designed to kill them. Sometimes, however, being lost is exactly where you need to be. The accidental pioneers. George Yount would later recall how they stumbled through the snow, following the Sevier River upstream to what is now Spry, Utah, before veering west to intercept Smith's route near Cedar City. What they didn't know was that they were pioneering a route that would eventually shorten the original trail by nearly 250 miles. Their mistake had become the foundation of a commercial empire. This wasn't just about finding a shorter route. It was about survival in a landscape that seemed actively hostile to human life. The eastern Utah section stretched across high, broken wasteland almost entirely devoid of vegetation, with water sources so scarce that men would kill for a muddy trickle. The passage through the Wasatch Mountains was a nightmare of rugged terrain and barely passable canyons. And then there was the final quarter, 300 miles of blistering desert completely destitute of game and nearly barren of grass and water. Yet men continued to cross it, because on the other side lay California, and California meant opportunity. The merchant prince, Antonio Armijo, was a different breed of pioneer. Where others saw obstacles, he saw business opportunities. In November 1829, this Mexican entrepreneur set out from Abaquiti with 30 men and a mule train loaded with New Mexican manufactured goods, hand-loomed blankets and serapes that would prove more valuable than gold in California markets. But Armijo faced a problem. It was too late in the season to take the northern route through the Uinta Mountains. So he chose to cross the Continental Divide and forge a completely new path through territory that existed only as blank spaces on maps. His route took him northwest up the Canyon Largo branch of the San Juan River, exiting New Mexico at the Four Corners. Here, he encountered 6 Navajos and hired one as a guide, paying him with 11 mares for protection and navigation through hostile territory. Using Father Escalante's 50-year-old map, Armijo's party traveled directly to the crossing of the Fathers, where they led their animals up from the canyon over the same rough steps that Escalante's party had carved into the sandstone decades earlier. After crossing the Colorado River, they acquired guides from Western tribes, men who had never seen horses and were terrified by these strange beasts. And then Rafael Rivera disappeared. The Mystery of the Missing Scout. January 1st, 1830. Armijo's diary entry is terse and terrifying. Citizen Rafael Rivera is missing from the reconnaissance party of the day before. In the trackless desert of what would become Nevada, losing a man wasn't just bad luck. It was a death sentence for the entire expedition. Rivera knew the way forward. Without him, they were lost. January 5th. Reconnaissance party returned and did not find Rivera. The situation was becoming desperate. Food was running low, water was scarce, and the desert stretched endlessly in all directions. January 7th. Citizen Rivera returned and announced that he had discovered the villages of the Cuchapayuches and Hayatas. Rivera had found the Paiutes at the warm springs near Las Vegas, and in doing so, he had discovered the key to crossing the Great Desert. The Trail of Bones. For the next 13 days, Armijo's diary entries read like a catalog of suffering. At Dry Lake, at the little spring of the Turtle, at the pass without water, a day's journey without water, at the Lake of the Miracle, a day's journey without any water. This was survival stripped to its essence, moving from one precious water source to another across a landscape designed to kill everything that lived. But on January 21st, Armijo made an entry that would change everything. At the arroyo of the Hayatas, at the end of which comes in the trail from Moqui, traveled by the Moquis with the object of trading shells with said Hayatas. Armijo had discovered something extraordinary, a trading route that had been used for centuries by Pacific Coast Indians to exchange shells with tribes along the Colorado and Virgin Rivers. He had found the ancient highway through the desert, and it would become the foundation of a commercial empire. The desert crossing was double the length of routes taken by previous explorers. Armijo's diary entries become increasingly desperate. Up the same arroyo. Along this arroyo, we ate a horse. We ate a mule belonging to Miguel Valdez. They were following the dry bed of the Mojave River, consuming their own transportation to stay alive. It was a race against death across 300 miles of hell. The rescue. On January 27th, salvation appeared in the form of a relief party from San Bernardino Ranch. Armijo's brief entry. We met the reconnaissance party with supplies and men from the ranch of San Bernardino doesn't capture the emotion of that moment, but one can imagine the desperate gratitude of men who had stared death in the face. The Californians were delighted with the bright New Mexican woven goods and even more delighted to trade them for horses and mules that had become so numerous they were considered almost worthless. Within a month, Armijo's merchandise had been exchanged for several hundred animals, creating profit margins that would make modern investors weep. But the return journey brought new dangers. The Navajos robbed Armijo of some of his animals. Yet on April 25, 1830, he arrived in the jurisdiction of Jemez, having completed the first successful commercial expedition on what would become the Old Spanish Trail. The Highway of Gold. The numbers tell the story of what Armijo had accomplished. A mule worth $10 in Los Angeles could easily sell for $50 in Santa Fe Plaza. The Old Spanish Trail had become a highway of gold, and every entrepreneur with courage and capital wanted a piece of it. But success brought new challenges. As more parties used the trail, the Ute chieftains became increasingly demanding in their extortion at fords and passes. The Paiutes, described as the hyenas of the western deserts, haunted the trail continually, pilfering night camps and killing stragglers. Year by year, small traders banded together into large caravans for mutual protection. By 1847–48, the trade had reached its peak with single great caravans moving westward each fall and returning in spring. Lieutenant George Brewerton, traveling with Kit Carson, described a spring caravan of 200 to 300 Mexican traders driving nearly 1,000 head of animals back across the desert. Their appearance was grotesque in the extreme, ranging from wealthy Californians in embroidered jackets with silver buttons to skin-clad Indians with bows and arrows. The irony wasn't lost on Brewerton. These poorly armed traders, carrying fortunes in livestock and goods, were so vulnerable that, A few resolute men might have captured their property and driven the traders like a flock of sheep. Yet they persisted, driven by profits that made the dangers worthwhile. The merchandise flowing eastward, silk and oriental goods that had reached California via Yankee clippers in the China trade, represented the first truly global commerce crossing the American continent. Legacy of the trail. The old Spanish trail had become more than a route. It was a lifeline connecting two worlds. From George Yount's accidental discovery of a shortened route to Antonio Armijo's pioneering commercial expedition, from the desperate survival tactics of desert crossing to the organized protection of great caravans, the old Spanish trail embodied everything that made the American frontier legendary: incredible danger, extraordinary courage, and the relentless pursuit of opportunity in the face of impossible odds. Imagine this. It's a moonless night in September 1779, somewhere in the rugged Colorado wilderness. 600 Spanish soldiers and their Native American allies are creeping through a mountain gully, hunting the most feared war chief on the frontier, a Comanche leader whose very name strikes terror into Spanish settlers across New Mexico. This chief has spent years raiding Spanish towns, killing hundreds, taking prisoners, and leaving devastation across hundreds of miles. His name is Cuerno Verde, the Greenhorn, and he's about to face the most legendary frontiersman in Spanish America, Juan Bautista de Anza. What happens next will change the course of history in the American Southwest and set the stage for one of the most remarkable peace processes ever negotiated between European colonists and Native American tribes. This is the story of an epic hunt, a climactic battle, and a diplomatic revolution. By 1779, the northern frontier of New Spain was in crisis. Spanish settlements in New Mexico were under constant assault from Comanche war bands who swept down from their strongholds in what is now Colorado. These weren't random raids. They were systematic campaigns of terror threatening to drive Spanish colonists from the region entirely. Teodoro de Croix, Commandant General of the vast northern frontier, faced a nightmare scenario. Traditional Spanish military tactics weren't working against these highly mobile horse warriors. Something had to change fast. The survival of Spanish New Mexico hung in the balance. Enter Juan Bautista de Anza, a man whose life reads like an adventure novel. Born on the frontier in 1736, Anza lost his father to an Apache ambush when he was barely 4 years old. He grew up knowing that survival meant mastering warfare. By 19, he was a commissioned officer. What set Anza apart wasn't just military skill. It was legendary courage. Stories spread throughout Sonora of this Basque frontiersman who would charge into hand-to-hand combat with Apache and Comanche warriors, emerging victorious time and again. He had led expeditions across uncharted wilderness, founded cities in California, and earned a reputation as one of the most capable frontier commanders in the Spanish Empire. Now, Spanish officials were betting everything on this one man's ability to solve their Comanche problem. When Anza arrived in New Mexico, he immediately grasped the challenge. Spanish settlements were scattered like islands in a hostile sea. Families lived on isolated ranches and farms, easy prey for raiding parties who could strike without warning and vanish into the wilderness. Traveling north from El Paso along the Camino Real, he witnessed devastation firsthand. Tomé had suffered 21 settlers killed in one summer raid, 30 more the following year. Albuquerque was terrified families living behind makeshift fortifications. Everywhere, Anza saw signs of a frontier under siege. But Anza was more than a soldier. He was a strategist. He understood that defense alone would never solve this problem. The source lay far north, in the Comanche heartland of southern Colorado, which the Spanish called Comancheria. To end the terror, he would have to take the fight directly to the enemy. Anza's plan was audacious. He would assemble a massive expedition, not just Spanish soldiers, but Native American allies who had their own scores to settle with the Comanches. He would march north into unmapped territory, find the Comanche camps, and deliver such a crushing blow that they would never again dare raid Spanish settlements. By August 1779, Anza had assembled his force, 200 veteran soldiers, over 200 militia members, and nearly 300 Ute and Apache warriors, traditional Comanche enemies eager to join this campaign of revenge. It was a multinational, multi-ethnic army unlike anything seen on the frontier. On August 15th, at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, this small army began its march north from Santa Fe. They were equipped for 40 days of campaigning in hostile territory, carrying everything needed for what everyone understood might be a one-way journey into the unknown. As they marched past the last Spanish settlements, Anza and his men entered a world where European maps meant nothing. They were guided by Indian allies who knew secret paths through mountain valleys, river crossings that appeared on no charts, and hidden routes that could keep a large force concealed from enemy scouts. The expedition faced challenges that would have broken lesser commanders. Unexpected cold fronts brought snow and fog. They were forced to march at night to avoid detection, stumbling through darkness with only starlight to guide them. They couldn't light fires because smoke might give away their position. But Anza's planning paid off. His scouts brought back intelligence that Comanche bands were gathering somewhere ahead, probably for one of their periodic councils. More importantly, they learned that the most feared war chief on the frontier was in the area, Cuerno Verde himself. Cuerno Verde wasn't just another Comanche leader. He was a figure of almost mythic proportions. Spanish records described him as consumed by hatred for colonists, someone who had forced his own warriors to take up arms against settlements across New Mexico. His father had held the same position and had also died fighting the Spanish, creating a cycle of vengeance that defined Cuerno Verde's entire life. When Anza's scouts finally made contact with Comanche forces, the chase began. The first engagement came suddenly. Spanish troops caught up with a Comanche band traveling to join Cuerno Verde's gathering. In the running battle that followed, 18 Comanche warriors were killed and over 30 women and children captured, along with 500 horses. More importantly, Anza's interrogation of prisoners revealed exactly where Cuerno Verde could be found. What followed was a deadly game across the Colorado wilderness. Anza pursued Cuerno Verde's trail for days, using every trick learned in decades of frontier warfare. When night fell after one engagement, the Comanches scattered in all directions, but Anza wasn't deterred. He had come too far to let his quarry escape. On September 3rd morning, Anza made a brilliant tactical decision. Instead of pursuing directly, he pretended to retreat, knowing Comanche scouts were watching. The deception worked perfectly. Convinced the Spanish were withdrawing, Cuerno Verde made his fatal mistake. He decided to make a stand. The final confrontation took place in a gully near the Arkansas River. When Anza spotted Comanche warriors firing muskets from nearby woods, he immediately identified the distinctive insignia marking their leader. There was Cuerno Verde himself, mounted on a magnificent horse, defiantly challenging the Spanish to advance. It was everything Anza had hoped for, a direct confrontation with the man who had terrorized Spanish settlements for years. The Comanche chief, perhaps driven by the pride that made him legendary, chose to fight rather than flee. With only 50 warriors against 600 Spanish troops and allies, it was hopeless, but also breathtakingly courageous. The battle was brief but decisive. Trapped in the gully with no escape, Cuerno Verde and his warriors dismounted and used their fallen horses as breastworks, fighting with desperate bravery until the end. When the shooting stopped, Cuerno Verde lay dead alongside his eldest son, 4 of his most famous captains, and a medicine man who had claimed to be immortal. Anza later reflected on the encounter with something approaching respect for his fallen enemy. Cuerno Verde had exposed himself needlessly during battle, refusing even to load his own musket. Such was his disdain for Spanish military capability. It was the pride of a warrior who had never known defeat, facing the reality that his time had finally come. The expedition's return to Santa Fe in September was triumphant, but Anza understood that military victory was only the beginning. The real challenge would be converting battlefield success into lasting peace, and here, the frontier commander proved as skilled a diplomat as warrior. The breakthrough came in July 1785, when 400 Comanches appeared at Taos seeking amnesty. Anza's response was masterful. He told them lasting peace could only be achieved if the Comanches united under a single leader. By fall, the various Comanche bands had gathered at Casa de Palo on the Arkansas River and elected a new chief named Equeracapa, whom the Spanish called Coda de Mala, coat of mail. But the peace process nearly collapsed when the Utes learned about negotiations. They were furious that Anza seemed to prefer making peace with unfaithful rebels rather than rewarding obedient friends. For hours they refused to smoke the peace pipe or accept gifts, threatening to walk away entirely. Anza's diplomatic skills proved equal to the challenge. Through patient negotiation, he convinced both sides that their mutual interest lay in peace rather than continued warfare. In February 1786, at Pecos Pueblo, a formal treaty was signed between the Utes and Comanches, with Spanish guarantees of fair treatment and special trading privileges. The agreement included a brilliant strategic element. Both tribes agreed to wage war against their common Apache enemies, either as auxiliaries with Spanish forces or independently. Anza had effectively redirected the region's endemic warfare away from Spanish settlements and toward tribes that remained hostile to colonial expansion. The results were immediate and dramatic. The Comanche raids that had terrorized New Mexico for decades simply stopped. Spanish settlers began moving north with confidence for the first time in living memory. Trade routes opened into Colorado, Utah, and the Great Basin. What had been a frontier of fear became a region of opportunity. It's 1857, and a 56-year-old businessman named John Butterfield has just signed what newspapers are calling the greatest swindle ever perpetrated. He's committed to moving mail from the Mississippi River to San Francisco in just 25 days, across nearly 3,000 miles of untamed wilderness, hostile territory, and desert wastelands. Critics are calling his route the oxbow for its ridiculous horseshoe shape that avoids every major population center. They're predicting spectacular failure. But here's the thing about impossible challenges. Sometimes they create legends. John Butterfield was about to attempt something so audacious that it would either make him the hero who connected a fractured nation or the fool who lost $1 million trying. Welcome to the story of America's most ambitious gamble, the Butterfield Overland Trail. To understand why anyone would attempt such madness, we need to go back to the 1850s, when America was a powder keg waiting to explode. The country had just won a massive chunk of territory from Mexico, including California, where gold had been discovered. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of people were racing west, but there was one problem. Nobody could agree on how to connect this booming new state to the rest of the nation. Why? Because everything had become about slavery. Congress was deadlocked. Anti-slavery politicians demanded a northern railroad route through the Rocky Mountains. Pro-slavery factions insisted on a southern route through Texas. Each side saw the railroad as a symbol of which vision of America would prevail. Meanwhile, California was getting restless. By 1856, disturbing rumors were circulating about California potentially forming its own separate nation. The state was wealthy, geographically isolated, and feeling disconnected from Washington, D.C. For politicians back east, this was terrifying. Enter Senator Weller with a stroke of political genius. In December 1855, he capitalized on everyone's fear of losing California by proposing something unprecedented: authorized not one, but two wagon roads to the west. The government would fund both a northern route from Independence, Missouri to San Francisco for $300,000 and a southern route from El Paso to Los Angeles for $200,000. After a year of heated debate, Congress passed legislation that was brilliantly clever. Instead of picking a single route for mail service, which would have meant endless political warfare, they decided to let private companies compete. The Post Office Department would solicit bids for a service that could deliver mail from any point on the Mississippi River to San Francisco in 25 days or less. The contract terms were mouthwatering: 6 years guaranteed, with subsidies ranging from $300,000 for semi-monthly service up to $600,000 for semi-weekly service. That's over $20 million in today's money annually. The route would be chosen not by Congress, but by the Postmaster General, Aaron F. Brown, a Tennessee politician with decidedly pro-slavery sympathies. When the bidding opened, few expected many takers. The capital requirements were enormous, the risks astronomical. Yet 9 to 10 hastily formed companies submitted proposals, most designating the safer northern South Pass route. Everyone expected Brown to award the contract to a Southern company. Instead, he selected Butterfield and Company, a New York firm with impressive connections. John Butterfield wasn't just any businessman. He was President Buchanan's close personal friend, and his company represented a who's who of American Express services: Adams Express, American Express, National Express, and Wells Fargo. These were the giants of American logistics. Butterfield's original proposal was politically brilliant. Start in St. Louis, follow the Santa Fe Trail to New Mexico, then take the 35th parallel to California. This route avoided both extremes, threading the needle between northern and southern political preferences. But Aaron Brown had other ideas. Brown rejected Butterfield's sensible proposal outright. St. Louis was unacceptable. The route bypassed Texas and the solid South. If Butterfield wanted the contract, he'd have to accept Brown's requirements: start in Memphis, swing southwest through Arkansas to the Red River, cross the entire state of Texas to El Paso, then connect to California via the Gila Trail. For Butterfield, this was a nightmare. Brown's route was 800 miles longer than his original proposal. It passed through virtually no populated areas. The only significant town on the 400-mile stretch from Memphis to El Paso was Little Rock, Arkansas. The route was a horseshoe-shaped monstrosity requiring massive additional investment with almost no local passenger business to cover costs. But Butterfield was shrewd. The law permitted the contractor free choice of route. After intense negotiations, they reached a complex compromise: semi-weekly mail service for the maximum $600,000 annual subsidy with dual eastern termini. One branch would start in Memphis via Little Rock, another in St. Louis via Tipton and Springfield. The branches would converge at Fort Smith, Arkansas, then follow the Marcy Simpson Trail to El Paso, the improved Gila Trail to Los Angeles, and the San Joaquin Valley to San Francisco. Total distance: 2,975 miles. Contract signed September 16, 1857. Deadline to begin service: 1 year. When northern newspapers got wind of the route, they exploded with outrage. The Chicago Tribune denounced it as the greatest swindle ever perpetrated by slaveholders. The Sacramento Union condemned it as a foul, wrong Panama route by land. New York editors labeled it the horseshoe or oxbow route, predicting operational failure despite what they called a scandalous subsidy. But while critics were busy condemning the route, John Butterfield was busy building it. At age 56, Butterfield personally led survey operations across the most challenging terrain in North America. From Fort Smith to El Paso stretched 1,000 miles of wilderness, arid plains, deserts, mountains, and territory populated only by roving Indian bands. The Marcy Simpson Trail existed more in name than reality. What Butterfield accomplished in that single year defies belief. He assembled the most capable construction superintendents from 4 major express companies. He recruited guides, scouts, and frontiersmen who had relationships with Indian tribes. He gathered local experts who knew every spring, waterhole, stream ford, and mountain pass. The scale of infrastructure Butterfield built reads like something from a fever dream. The route was divided into short relay segments to enable rapid travel. At each relay point, the company constructed living quarters, stables, and corrals, then stationed experienced frontiersmen as guards and hostlers with stockpiled supplies. Way stations were built at the end of each day's travel segment, equipped with sleeping and feeding accommodations. Each station required trained keepers, blacksmith shops, harness repair facilities, relay horses and mules, and emergency supplies. The company built bridges, constructed ferries, modified creek banks, removed boulders, dug wells, cleared mountain passes, and graded roads for safe passage over rough terrain. Material and supplies were shipped from river landings and seaports, then delivered by great freight caravans. The company sought the toughest horses and mules available, manufactured hundreds of harness sets, and acquired specialized vehicles, freight wagons, tank wagons for water supply, luxurious Concorde coaches, and rugged celerity wagons with canvas tops for wilderness sections. By launch time, the numbers were staggering. Total expenditure, over $1 million within 1 year, equivalent to about $35 million today. Infrastructure, over 200 way stations and relay posts along the 2,975-mile route. Equipment, 250 Concorde coaches plus 500 additional vehicles. Livestock, over 1,800 horses and mules. Supplies, nearly 3,000 tons of hay, grain, and provisions. Personnel, over 1,200 skilled employees manning the line. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect wasn't the infrastructure. It was the people. Butterfield recruited what he called rough, tough frontiersmen with wildcat courage and Lobo wolf endurance. These were individuals who could withstand demanded hardships and perform tasks that would break most people. The operational instructions reveal the deadly seriousness of the enterprise. Passenger and mail protection was the absolute priority. Schedule maintenance was critical. Friendly relations with Indians were essential. Drivers and conductors were authorized to carry weapons but could use them only when lives or mail safety were definitively endangered. Gold and silver shipments were prohibited to prevent highwayman attacks. The responsibilities were mind-boggling. Drivers had to know every twist and turn of their 60-mile routes for night travel. They were exclusively assigned to their territories and had to be ready to depart within 10 minutes regardless of rest. Conductors held absolute authority over passengers, mail, and express, with responsibility to guard with their lives if necessary. Butterfield's motto captured the stakes perfectly. Remember, boys, nothing on God's earth must stop the United States mail. Join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description and link above. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest story. Check out my large catalog of Southwest videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold stories, and adult bedtime stories. If you like a certain image from my videos, tell me in comments and give timestamp. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more great content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.